Well, they are, by the way, and we're going to talk about that, I believe, next week as we talk about a theory that does bring in intelligent design. It's aliens, not God, but they're bringing that in because they realize life cannot start in and of itself on this planet. Now listen to this. And evolution eventually changed into a religion. There are religions being taught in our schools, and one of them is evolution. Evolution is a religion. This is the opinion of these Chinese scientists. It's become like a religion to us. And what I'm saying as a creationist is, let the evidence take us where it will. If it takes us to evolution, so be it. But if the evidence is taking us in a different place, so be it. Let's look at all the evidence. Let's not hide it. But that's what's happening today. This is a quote right out of this article. For now, however, data contrary to classical neo-Darwinian ideas are as closely guarded as nuclear secrets. They're not letting any data that comes in out into our public schools, into our universities. That was the testimony of Michael Behe last week. He went through a doctoral program in biology. Never heard any of the arguments against evolution. Just how powerful is Chen's mystery of life? And why would anyone want to keep neo-Darwinism's shortcomings a secret? Westerners attending paleontology conferences in the East, in China, prefer to steer away from discussions about those questions. Wow. Let's look at all the evidence. The Cambrian explosion is powerful evidence against evolution. It speaks to the biblical account that God created, and he created according to his plan and his design. Here's another thing you need to know, and that you can say to evolutionists. There are no confirmed transitional fossils. There are no confirmed transitional fossils. Well, you might say, well, Mel, what is a transitional fossil? Well, it's this. A transitional fossil is one that is intermediate. It's in the middle. It's in between two lineages. You have a lineage of a reptile, for example. That would be lineage A. And then there's a bird, lineage B. Now, evolutionists will say over millions of years, the reptile eventually evolved into a bird. That's what happened. Well, if that is true, there should be billions of transitional fossils of reptiles slowly changing into a bird over time. It's not just reptile to bird. Remember, evolutionists say all forms of life evolve from one another. All of us came from a common descent of a one-cell organism somehow becoming alive. If that's the case, there should be billions of transitional forms in the fossil record. A little bit of A and a little bit of B mixed together. Like this reptile. Over billions of years, if that reptile evolved into a bird, well, there should be slow changes that are happening over time, and the fossil records should support that. There should be billions of these intermediate forms. Now, scientists will say, well, there are. And they'll point to organisms that have fully developed wings. That's not an intermediate form. We're talking about, what about when those wings first began to sprout? There were little nubs on the back of the reptile. Do we have any fossil record to support that these changes were happening over millions of years and the wings weren't fully functional yet? Because obviously when that reptile had offspring that had little nubs sticking out of their back, the beginning of wings, they weren't fully functional. They didn't allow that organism to fly. So there should be billions of transitional forms in the fossil record. Let me tell you how many have been confirmed. 0. None. Not one. Don't point to a fully functioning biological organism and say that's a transitional form. I was just reading an article this week about transitional forms. And this scientist said, well, of course there's transitional forms. What did he point to? He pointed to apes and chimpanzees, that they are transitional forms leading up to humans. They're not. They're fully functioning biological organisms that obviously, I believe, were designed by God, designed by him. They're not transitional between humans and apes. We can't find any transitional forms. Philip Johnson says this in Darwin on Trial. Evolution would have filled the fossil record with billions of intermediate creatures, yet not one of these missing links has ever been located. Here's another truth you have to grasp, the truth of this, the power of this. Not one has ever been located. Don't allow an evolutionist to point to an organism that has fully functioning legs or fully functioning wings and say that's a transitional form. That's not. That's not. We're talking about the intermediary forms between a reptile and a bird, for example, as the wings begin to develop. Here's Stephen Gould again, not a creationist. He writes this: indeed, it is the chief frustration of the fossil record that we do not have empirical evidence for sustained trends in the evolution of the most complex morphological adaptations. We don't have it. It's not there. No sustained trends. And what he's saying is those middle forms. We have an ape, we have a human. What about in the middle? We have a reptile and a bird. What about in the middle? No sustained trends. Not there. Chief frustration of the fossil record. Now think about it. Again, here's this reptile that evolution would say over millions of years became a bird. Can you imagine what those first wings look like? That mama reptile had an offspring that had these little things sticking out of her back that weren't fully functioning yet? And here's the bigger question, by the way. Does science prove that that can be passed on to offspring? That there is a trend over time? Do we see that happening anywhere in creation today? Do we see any biological organism that's slowly changing? You would think with all the millions of life forms out there that there would be just one that's presently involved in evolution. If evolution and natural selection is as powerful as evolutionists say it is, why isn't there just one? Give me one that's changing today. Can't find it. In which all of a sudden these new appendages or new wings are beginning to sprout out of this organism. And it's not just the wings. To change it to a bird, the tail has to change. He's got to start losing those front legs. And think about for a minute the DNA information that must change. As you know, DNA is really the building block molecule of life. Your color hair, your color skin, your color eyes were all determined, your size, by DNA. The formation of your hand, determined by DNA. DNA is the information that guides that process. That's an amazing amount of information. We're going to talk about this later. I believe it's one of the greatest challenges to evolution because there's no answer for it. How did the information to form these perfectly designed wings get into the DNA and then get passed on to the offspring? How did that happen? How does information get added to DNA? Can't happen. And you know it's not just the wings and the legs and the tail. There's many other morphological changes that need to happen within a reptile so that that reptile can eventually, over millions of years, fly. Show me one intermediate form. Show me one fossil of a reptile that has wings sprouting out of its back. Can't find it. It's not there. And don't allow evolutionists to say, and they'll say this, oh, we have tons of transitional forms. No, they're fully functioning biological organisms. Don't show us those. Show us the intermediary, the ones in the middle. And the problem over time has been getting worse. When Darwin wrote his book, The Origin of the Species, it's gotten worse since then. It's not better. What about mutations? Evolution will say that mutations is what drives the diversity of life, that these slow mutations can happen. I have a family of 5 children, and my first 3 kids were girls. My last 2 were boys. And there's a little bit of a danger when you have boys with older girls because they tend to, dress up the boys like they're dolls, and it can be dangerous. And I came home this week, and this is truly what happened. I came home this week, and here's my tough, rough 2-year-old son, Brady, looking like this, dressed up by the older girls with his wings on. Now, I took a picture of that to show you because I thought, that's a great example of how evolution can work. Can you imagine the DNA information that would be needed to form wings like that on the back of my son? To form perfectly designed wings like that. Think of a butterfly. The DNA information that is required to make those kind of changes is just beyond imagination. It's mind-boggling. And yet we are told all the time that somehow all of this massive information that's needed to make these kind of changes just somehow appeared in DNA. These are massively complex changes. Can't happen. No explanation for it. Darwinists and evolutionists will give you fancy terms for it. But if you ask them and push them on, and I've seen debates about this is what they will ultimately say. They will say, we don't know how it happened, but obviously it's there, so it happened. It's not a good answer. It's not a good answer. The Bible says that God designed life.